guys. I'm very excited to be able to talk about why spiritual growth is important. Thank you for joining. We're very focused on having clarity during this crisis that's been happening all around us, whether it's in our home or in our communities or just in the world at large. And today, my esteemed guest is Dr. Gloria Brown. We're going to try to unpack why spiritual growth is so important. It's really critical for us to understand that. I know for myself, personally, I've learned that spiritual growth is critical to my development, to navigating the splinter in my life. And we can all agree that right now, the world is in splinters, right? If there was ever a time to talk about getting beyond the splinter or navigating the splinter, it would be right now. A lot of us are going through our own version of a splinter, and we're also impacted by what's happening around us. So right now, in terms of splinters, we got the COVID-19 crisis, we got economic breakdown, political unrest, families that are breaking apart. We have quite a bit of things that are just pulling us in all different directions. So I'm excited, like I said, to talk about this subject because I think it's so important. So for right now, I just want to say thank you for joining us. And Dr. Brown, I would like to welcome you to our show this evening. Dr. Brown, can you hear me?
Yes, I can, and it's great to be back. I am committed to trying to help us all reach the best version of ourselves. And over the period of this time, we've talked about the importance of taking care of your body, your soul, and now we're going to talk about your spirit, why it's important to grow spiritually.
So yes, Dr. Brown has the experience of over 20 years as a psychotherapist, and she's also a life coach. So please, by all means, seize upon the opportunity to ask any questions you may have. And from the perspective of spiritual growth, why do you think spiritual growth is even worth pondering? Why do you think it's important?
It's important because there are forces affecting our lives that we really don't, most of the time, we're not aware of. And these forces can affect us for the good or bad. And if we're conscious, just as important to be conscious about spiritual things as it is about your body and taking care of it, or about your soul and making sure that spiritual forces come in two varieties, either loving or hateful. And while it might seem a no-brainer that you can tell the difference, it isn't. You see, the reality is that if we've had a difficult upbringing, perceptions of things may not be accurate. And so we may think that we're doing good when in fact what we're doing is hurting other people. So it's important to look at what that's all about. And by the way, I want to say that spiritual things run a gambit, okay? In other words, it's not limited to a particular belief system.
Okay, so you're saying on the one hand, it involves a search for meaning, for the meaning of life and being connected to the divine.
Basically, love and hate don't belong to any particular sect.
Okay.
You're going to find loving and hateful people no matter what belief system you attach yourself to.
So to grow spiritually is independent of what you believe from a religious point of view.
To grow spiritually means that you know what you believe, you're committed to it, and you make every effort to study and build your knowledge and your understanding of how your connection to the divine can help you in terms of dealing with your day-to-day struggles.
Okay, that sounds really up here for me. So, I'm hoping that as we go on, we can get more specific about what it means to grow spiritually. It sounds to me like there's an awareness component that we cannot ignore, because awareness makes a difference with everything. So tell me what it means specifically to you. I know what you told me the definition is, but what does being aware, in terms of your spiritual growth, mean to you? And why is awareness important?
Well, to me, as a Christian, it's important to know what is required of me. I can call myself a Christian, but if I don't spend the time to read what my God tells me he wants, it's not my idea, and it's not somebody else's idea, although a lot of times that happens. You know, we want to make our worship of God like a restaurant that we go in and we choose this and we choose that, you know? And in some cases, we want to say, who is that says my way, right away? That's spiritual immaturity. That's you thinking that meeting your needs takes priority. When in fact, if you are a committed person, if you are devout, if you are devoted to whatever you say you believe, you are going to spend the time to look and see what that belief is saying. And for a Christian, you're looking in the Bible.
Okay. Well, but there are a lot of Christians who, as you know, they believe in that, they're spiritual because they believe in God. But does that make them spiritual, or does that mean that they're spiritually, are they growing? Well, but from your perspective, what does that mean?
Well, I want to say my perspective is not the benchmark for it. It's really Christ's perspective. And what he calls people like that is babies in Christ. You know, they're immature. And that immaturity leads to a lot of pain and problems in that person's life and in the life of other people. For example, I recall instances in which I was working with people who identified as Christians, but the behavior was anything other than loving. You know, the behavior was divisiveness, selfishness, all sorts of negativity. Right. That is not a devout Christian. That is not a committed Christian. That is a baby Christian.
Baby Christian, still drinking milk, huh? Sucking on the bottle. Is that what you're saying? Okay. So from the perspective of awareness, it sounds to me like we are energetic beings and we're being influenced by positive or negative forces in nature.
Yes, we're influenced by unseen life forces. We can't see them, but they have a direct connection to us, and the connection to us is through our thoughts. And those thoughts are either loving thoughts about ourselves, about other people, about the world, or negative thoughts in which other people, even ourselves, other people, the world, mean nothing.
Well, here's the thing though, Dr. Ron, I get a lot of thoughts all day long. I mean, my thoughts be wild, actually. Does that mean because I'm getting negative thoughts means that I am not growing spiritually? Is that what I'm hearing?
In other words, according to scripture, again, remember, don't kill the messenger, all right? According to scripture, when we are following Christ, we are behaving in loving ways. Now, that doesn't mean that we're always perfect and we're always loving, but we do ourselves a disservice to dismiss it as, well, that's just me and it's okay. No, that's not you and it's not okay. Why? Because if you are a Christian, if you are a devoted Christian, you have made an agreement with God. And the agreement says, not my will, but your will. And anytime you start going off on your will or somebody else's will, no matter what label you put on yourself, that is not a mature Christian.
Okay,
according to Paul.
I understand that's what you believe because you're a Christian, but for the person who's not a Christian and just want to grow spiritually and want to understand what spirituality or spiritual growth is, what is the indicator? What are the indicators that they're growing? Is it this idea of the negative and the positive influence and how much they ingest that or allow it to influence their thoughts? Or is it something else?
I can't speak specifically for other religions, but I can tell you that if you say you believe in something, whatever you believe in, if you're doing the opposite of it, you're not committed. So that means if you're a Muslim and you're not following that way, you must be a baby Muslim or something, okay? Or in other words, and this happens in every religion, which by the way, let's just talk about religion for a minute. Religion is nothing more than man's idea about how they should worship God, from my perspective. So people have a lot of different ideas. Whatever your ideas are, if you're not committed to it, it's probably not going to work. And if you're not committed to it, you'll probably never know whether or not it really works.
Right. So the test is in the commitment. So you have to do before you know. I get it. So let's consider your spiritual growth journey, or just the growth journey in general. Before we get to that, let me ask this one other question. Is spiritual growth a matter of, well, I think you already answered it. It's not a matter of a particular affiliation, but it is a matter of our commitment and our willingness to actually do what we've learned that's supposed to impact our lives. Because, I've been on this spiritual journey myself, and sometimes, or in the past, I would think that I couldn't tell if I was growing or not. And I wasn't necessarily going around being negative, I don't think. Maybe because I wasn't as aware as I thought I was. And so the awareness component is so important, because I will just let my thoughts go wherever and not realizing that it's directly tied into my spiritual growth. And I think that's a big part of this whole puzzle here, that my thinking is a reflection of my spiritual growth. So let me ask the other question I want to ask now. So whether or not the person's aware of it, do you think they're going through a spiritual journey? Is everyone on a spiritual journey, whether or not they're aware of it?
I think so. And an indication of that is the forces that are influencing you. You know how you're left feeling. You're either left feeling good about yourself, good about other people, good about the world. And if you are feeling good about yourself, then that means that's a positive, or I like to call it a loving spirit affecting you. Right. That kind of a spirit leaves you at ease. You're okay with yourself and the world. You're not causing chaos. However, if you are being influenced by negativity, and we all, listen, please, okay, we know about negativity. We don't have to guess about that one, all right? There's sufficient people running around saying, even Christians, saying, I'm not good enough. I'm not okay. I'm unhappy with this. I don't have this. Somebody else has that. I hate this one. That's clearly not representative of a loving God.
So the person, you and I, or anyone, can know that they're growing spiritually by give me your best 2 good points, that's short and brief. If this is happening and that is happening, I can tell that I'm growing spiritually. What are those things you would say?
I would say you can tell that you're growing spiritually if you spend the time to find out what is required of you and you do it.
It's that simple, huh? Spend the time to find out what is required and then do it.
Now, here's the problem. Most of us don't have time. We don't have time because of what we make priorities. We're not making what Christ, in the instance of a Christian, okay? We are not making Christ the priority. The priority is, I got to pay my bills. I want to feel good. I want to do this. I want to have that.
Yes.
Okay? When those things become the priority, we don't make time. Spending time to find out about something that we can't see and don't understand how it affects us makes little sense. It may even seem like a waste of time. I don't have time for that.
So it's an issue of managing priorities.
Yes.
As well. Managing your time is, because none of us really have time. We have to make the time. So we have to manage our priorities. And if my spiritual growth is at the top of my priority list, and I'll make the time. And that's how I've grown, because it's definitely a journey of growth into managing my priorities. I get up in the morning and I practice what I call the miracle morning routine. Silence, affirmation, visualization, exercise, reading, and scribing or writing in my journal. And it's just my time to just kind of sit in the presence of God and just say, God, here I am. This morning I was just like, God, you see all the stuff that goes on in my mind and my heart? I want you to help me with my inner person, the things that nobody else sees, but only you know and I know, because you knew me before I was born. Like, I'm just catching up with me, but you knew me way before. And just even verbalizing that gave me a sense of, wow, I don't know even half the picture. I don't even know a fraction of the picture. So it kind of opened me up to feel this sense of the awesomeness of God, because I realized that I'm just like a speck, you know? And it gave me rest, knowing that I don't have to know everything and figure everything out, but I can come to God and say, God, I don't understand some things that are happening. I don't even know myself. Like I just said, I'm playing catch up. Meanwhile, he knew me way before I was born. So that was really encouraging for me this morning, just finding the time and making the time to spend time in his presence.
Yes, and the more time we spend and the more we focus on his word, see, what he says is what changes us. You see, for a Christian who's completely committed, they are no longer looking for answers within themselves or other people. And if you're not looking for answers within yourself and other people, you have to look into the word. That is the Bible. Now, the scripture says that when we spend time reading that word, something happens to us. God's Holy Spirit enters us. And when he enters us more fully, he's cutting his word. He enters to his word. His word is cutting away everything that doesn't belong. You know, all those things that we decided were a part of life that couldn't change, all the hurts that we can't forget. You know, it's no longer self-help, it's God help. But if we don't let him help, we get in the way of our own growth.
Getting in the way of your own growth. That's a big one right there. Because a lot of times we're not even aware that we're doing that. We don't know that we don't know that we are getting in the way of our own growth, which brings me to the whole thing of the positive and negative forces that are at work, in addition to the fact that we get in the way of our own growth. Some of these negative and positive forces that you talk about, the loving spirit versus the negative spirit. Can you give me examples from your own life of when you saw a force that was at work and how you managed to navigate or circumvent or overcome from a spiritual perspective?
Well, for those who have been listening, I have been talking about the same thing, and I will share it again because it was that significant in my life. So when I left the service to go to school in Columbia University, okay, I had to make a transition. I had to make a transition from being in an environment where things were plentiful for me. You know, I didn't worry about food, clothing, shelter, any of that stuff. I didn't worry about housing and things like that, or education for my kids, because all those things were taken care of for me in the military. I mean, if something happened in the house, I just picked up the phone, I'd have to pay a penny and somebody came and fixed it.
Wow.
But coming out of the service, all of that stuff fell on me. That fell on me. At that point, you know, my husband left. He had PTSD. I mentioned that for those of you who know my situation. He tried to kill me several times and ultimately decided to leave before he did. He didn't want to do it. It was the illness, you see. Right. And as I said to you, you know, I'm not the wallflower, all right? I was in the military too. So even though we were both in there, and we were both combat trained, okay, I was not gonna sit back. All right, so because of that, he said, I gotta go, because I don't know if I'm going to be able to hold on, to keep my anger, keep control of all of this. So, okay, he left. And when he left, I was now in the journey, my educational journey of trying to improve myself so that I could make a living for my children and for myself and my children. And so part of that meant getting into Columbia. And once I got in there, you know, I had some PTSD. Listen, you can't live with somebody who has PTSD and not have something.
Tell the audience, what is PTSD?
Post-traumatic stress disorder. Stressed out, and stressed out to the max, and you don't have to go to the military to get that. You know, that's like tore up from the floor up and hanging on strong. I can't remember the name of the song, but it says, "Don't push me to the edge. I'm close." Okay. Well, anyway, the bottom line was I got accepted in there, and the woman who was my advisor, she was racist. Bottom line. Okay. And I wouldn't play the game because I thought, you know what? I put my life on the line. My husband pretty much lost his life. And for me to come here and suck up to you, it's not happening. Okay? It's just not happening. I am not going to pretend to be other than who I am. And who was I? Yes, I was Gloria Brown, who was a military person, but I came out of Harlem and I was not ashamed of it. And I said so. And she said, "What?" "I don't know how you got in here, but I'm going to make it my business to get you out." Oh, wow. So at that point, there were positive and negative voices screaming at me, okay?
Yeah.
The negative voices was, "Kill that beat," okay?
Right.
God's voice, I remembered him. And I said, "God, if you are up there, this would be a very good time for you to make yourself known." And he did. And the long and short of the story is, when she was walking out, they put her out. because of her meanness. It caught up to her.
They fired her?
Yes, they did. And she deserved it. Okay?
I didn't hear that part of the story before.
They fired her. What she did was she delayed my graduation process. But when I came back, she was walking out. And I said, God, now I know you were there. I know that I know that I know. So that's
definitely a very specific example of how you navigated negative voices. And I think that's the thing with spiritual growth. You have to, it's not like we don't have these terrible things that come up against us, but it's how we not so much react, but how we respond. If we react, more than likely, I found that when I react to stuff, the impact is usually negative. But if I can take a pause and kind of do what you did and say, God, or God, help me, or help me to understand, or help me to see this from your perspective, or help me to, process it properly, then I can respond versus react. And that makes a huge difference. So the loving spirit comes usually way after I've implemented what the steps of spiritual growth, the step that is required for that moment. But in the moment, in the middle of the battle, I don't feel any good loving feelings. It's usually after I have obeyed or do what is right from God's perspective that this loving spirit comes. But I also know that, that if I listen to the hateful voices, there is a laundry list of unpleasant emotions, a laundry list, like the laundry that's waiting for me right now. And over time, it does lead to mental illness. It leads to depression and anxiety. And anxiety, I know firsthand, and I know depression as well. And while I wasn't aware that the forces were impacting me in the way that they were, that's exactly what was happening. So whether or not I'm aware, you're right, a spiritual journey does go on. And that's why I talk about my splinter in the book that I wrote, Peace Beyond the Splinter, because those negative forces did impact my life. And even though I was too young to understand what was happening, didn't stop it from happening. And it didn't stop it from impacting me. So I'm glad you brought up that portion about the negative forces that affect us, and it's happening whether or not we are aware of it. Very, very good point.
Well, I'd like to add something to that.
Go ahead.
Because all of us have experienced negativity, and some of it very, very deep. Sometimes the feelings that come from that pain can change our personality.
Wow.
It can make us think that we are somebody that we're not. In other words, I'm talking about, I'm talking specifically now from a Christian perspective. Mm-hmm. So God said that He created us, and when He created us, it was good. We were good. Mm-hmm. Okay? It's hard to keep that in mind when someone has abused you.
Yeah.
And, either physically or whatever way, emotionally, you're no good, you're nothing, you're not going to be anybody. When you have all these kinds of negative forces that have impacted your life over a period of time, you are no longer who God created you to be. And for that reason, you have to be willing to give that person up. And the process of giving that person up is called being born again. Being born again means that whole heart that developed because of all that pain, you give it all to God. See, it's none of you. It's none of me. I didn't change myself. I wanted to kill that woman. But I just remembered that there was a God who had more power than me, and so I called on Him. And He answered me. And He says, call on me in your day of trouble, and I will answer you. And it has nothing to do with how good you are. That's why he had to die on the cross. His death on the cross paid for your past sins, your present sins, and your future sins. Now, I thought that was a very good deal, so I went that way.
So, you know, it's really powerful that not only are you a doctor from the perspective of helping people emotionally to overcome these kinds of splinters that happen in their lives, but being able to combine that with a spiritual perspective from God's point of view, or a maker, makes it for a very compelling reason to get help. If you're in this group and you feel like you need some emotional help to navigate the crises that we are in, I implore you to reach out in the group so that I can connect you to Dr. Brown and have a conversation. I'm looking at some stats right now. It says that 80 to 90% of illnesses begin in our minds. That's really powerful and really an amazing statistics. So you're saying if I have cancer, according to the stats, diabetes, stroke, all these things, it began here first?
There is a book. It's called The Body Keeps the Count.
Wow.
And pretty much what happens is your thoughts, your negative thoughts stress you out. And if that stress lasts long enough, it goes into your body and it begins to stress out your body. See, a lot of times we don't even know the strength that we have. Some of you may have heard of situations in which a mother's child was caught in a car. You know, the car hit the child and is on top of the child. The body can rearrange itself so that that woman will pick up that car and pull the kid from under it. I don't know if you've ever heard of that. In other words, that's the amount of strength that we go around with. In other words, we are equipped to fight or to run. And when we don't do anything with that, when we keep that in us, it causes the body to start breaking down. And what breaks down is whatever is genetically weak in you. Is it your heart? Is it your liver? Eastern medicines are very good at that. In fact, I once worked with a Korean doctor, and she told me, she says, you know, in my country, we do healing. We don't do treatment. Wow. If we have a caseload and everybody on our caseload is sick, we might lose our license because we're not doing our job.
Wow.
And they've been studying this thing so long that they can, if you go in there and say, you go in with a heart, let's say a heart problem, they're gonna ask you, what are you angry about? There's a connection.
Wow. If
you go in there with diabetes, what are you worried about? Okay, there's a difference. There's a difference between healing and treating. Treating is, let's try this medicine. Maybe it'll work. And if it does, fine. If it doesn't,
let's try another medicine.
Yes.
That's how America does it.
But we can't blame the doctors because that's what we want. It goes back to time again and what we value. What is our value system? What's important to us? And here, what's important a lot of times is keeping up with the Joneses and all this kind of stuff, okay? When you're doing that, you don't have time for things that don't go along that line.
Well, thank you for that, because the doctrine you definitely just came out when you talked about the fact that the mind, a lot of times, is the real catalyst for all these physical ailments that we have. And so it's so important for us to be treating our minds by fighting to grow spiritually so that we don't stay in a negative space. Even though we can't avoid negative forces, they don't have to influence us to the point where they start to break down the organs. I didn't know this, that it breaks down, stress can break down the organs in my body that are genetically weak inside of me if it's not treated over time. Am I correct?
Yes.
Wow. So again, this is why spiritual growth is so important. There's so much more that we could talk about here, and as to why spiritual growth is important, but this is definitely a big component here today, how our minds affect our body, and all these ailments that we complain about start with the fact that spiritually we need to grow. So,
well, let me just add this. In other words, the spiritual community at large, especially Eastern medicine, recognizes this. They talk about mind and the body continuously. Right. And when they talk about mind and body, they're talking about healing by trying to heal the body by whatever method they came up with, based on their belief system. I like to add that I'm working on a devotional that I'm going to make available hopefully within a month, so that it can aid people in their quest for healing through spirituality and Christians' spirituality.
Spiritual growth. Thank you so much. I appreciate the time, and we'll catch you next time, Dr. Brown.
Okay.
Have a good one. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye.